Welcome to Crime Story with Camila, where we dive deep into the most chilling and mysterious true crime cases. If you love real-life crime stories, make sure to like, subscribe, and share so you never miss an update. Your support helps us bring you the most in-depth investigations and untold stories. On a cold February evening in 2023, in the quiet town of Quincy, Illinois, a peaceful family home became the scene of an execution. 14 gunshots shattered the silence. Inside that home lay a 41-year-old mother of three and nursed a daughter, a woman who had spent her life caring for others. Her name was Becky Bliefnick. She was found brutally murdered in her own living room, her children asleep upstairs, unaware that their world had just been destroyed. Becky Bliefnick was 41 years old. She was a registered nurse, a profession built on compassion, long hours, and selflessness. Co-workers described her as gentle, reliable, and deeply dedicated to her patients. Many said she treated strangers like family, but the role that mattered most to Becky was being a mother. She had 3 young sons, her entire world. Everything she did revolved around their safety, their school schedules, their sports practices, their bedtime routines. Friends said she rarely spoke about herself without mentioning her boys. Becky lived in Quincy, Illinois, a small, quiet river town where people know their neighbors and crime is rare. It was the kind of place where children ride bicycles in the street and families feel safe at night. To the outside world, Becky's life appeared stable. A steady career, a home, 3 healthy children. But beneath that calm surface, her personal life was quietly unraveling. Becky had been married for years. Like many relationships, it did not collapse suddenly. It eroded slowly. Small arguments turned into constant tension. Trust fractured. Fear began to replace comfort. By the time the marriage reached its final stages, Becky was no longer just unhappy, she was afraid. She confided in close friends that the divorce process was becoming hostile. She worried about how far resentment might go. She began documenting messages, saving conversations, preparing in case something went wrong. Despite the fear, Becky pressed forward. She showed up for work. She attended her kids' school events. She smiled in public. She protected her children from the storm gathering behind closed doors. But as the custody battle intensified and emotions escalated, the danger she sensed would soon become horrifyingly real. And the man she once trusted with her life was about to become her greatest threat. By the time the divorce was officially filed, the marriage between Becky Bliefnick and Tim Bliefnick had already deteriorated beyond repair. What had once appeared to be a normal family life was now consumed by resentment, suspicion, and emotional distance. Court records later revealed that arguments over money, parenting, and control had become constant. The divorce process did not bring relief. It amplified the hostility. The most explosive issue of all: custody of the children. Both Becky and Tim wanted primary custody, but while Becky focused on stability for the boys, Tim became increasingly consumed by losing control of the household. Witnesses later testified that Tim struggled to accept the separation. He was angry over child support, angry over shared parenting decisions, angry that Becky was moving forward with her life. And Becky could feel the shift. Her messages to friends became darker, her tone more fearful, her trust more cautious. She began to say things that, in hindsight, now feel haunting. She told people she was afraid of what Tim might do. She talked about changing locks. She considered installing cameras. She stopped answering certain calls. Most chilling of all, she began documenting threats and suspicious behavior, telling those closest to her, "If something happens to me, he did it." That single sentence would later echo through the courtroom like a prophecy. Despite the fear, Becky remained focused on protecting her children from the emotional war unfolding between their parents. She shielded them as best she could. She avoided confrontation when possible. She tried to believe that the legal system would protect her. But behind the scenes, Tim was growing more isolated, more resentful, and more desperate. The divorce had stripped him of control. And for a man who thrived on dominance, that loss would soon turn deadly. Unbeknownst to Becky, while she was trying to survive the separation peacefully, someone was already planning the unthinkable. February 23rd, 2023. It was a cold Thursday evening in Quincy, Illinois. The streets were quiet. The Bliefnick home sat in darkness, lit only by a few lamps glowing through the windows. Inside, Becky Bliefnick was doing what she did every night, caring for her 3 sons. Homework was finished. Baths were done. The boys were tucked safely into bed upstairs. The house grew quiet. Nothing about the night suggested danger. No screaming. No forced entry. No warning. Just before 8 p.m., someone entered the home. Whoever it was, they came with purpose. Moments later, the silence was shattered by gunfire. 14 shots tore through the house. 14. The bullets struck Becky in the face, chest, and torso. The attack was not rushed. It was not panicked. It was precise, controlled, filled with rage. This was not a robbery. Nothing was stolen. No rooms were ransacked. This was an execution. The killer fled within moments, leaving behind shattered glass, spent shell casings, and a scene of unimaginable violence. Upstairs, Becky's children slept through the gunfire, unaware that their mother had just been taken from them forever. Hours later, Becky's father arrived at the home after being unable to reach her by phone. When he stepped inside, he found the unthinkable. His daughter lay motionless. Blood stained the floors. Shell casings littered the room. There was no sign of life. Police and paramedics rushed to the scene, but Becky was already gone. She was pronounced dead inside her own home. The town of Quincy would wake up the next morning to news that would ripple through every neighborhood. A nurse to mother had been brutally murdered. And almost immediately, investigators began asking one chilling question: who would want her dead? Within hours, attention quietly turned toward one person: her estranged husband, Tim Bliefnick. They were in the middle of a bitter divorce, a heated custody battle, financial disputes, and Becky had already warned others that she feared for her life. Detectives secured the crime scene and began collecting evidence. 14 shell casings, bullet fragments from Becky's body, entry and exit wound trajectories, tire and foot impressions outside, and nearby surveillance camera footage. What stood out immediately was the lack of forced entry. That suggested one of two things. Either Becky had willingly opened the door, or the person who entered knew exactly how to get inside. As news spread through Quincy, fear turned into shock, then into whispered suspicion. People began talking. Neighbors replayed memories. Friends remembered Becky's warnings. And behind the scenes, detectives were beginning to uncover something even more disturbing than physical evidence: a digital trail that suggested the murder had been planned. But on that night, all anyone knew was this: a woman had been hunted inside her own home, and her killer was still free. By sunrise the next morning, the quiet streets of Quincy, Illinois were flooded with police vehicles, detectives, and crime scene technicians. Inside the Bliefnick home, investigators worked through the night. They documented 14 shell casings, blood spatter patterns across multiple walls, bullet trajectories showing Becky was shot at close range, and a total absence of forced entry. This was not a break-in. This was a targeted killing. Within just a few hours, detectives narrowed their focus to one primary suspect: Tim Bliefnick, Becky's estranged husband. He was in the middle of a heated divorce, a custody fight over their 3 children, and a financial dispute involving child support. But motive alone was not enough. Police needed proof, and that proof would come from a place Tim never expected to betray him: his own digital footprint. Detectives seized Tim's phone, laptop, and internet records. What they found would become some of the most damning evidence in the case. Searches recovered from his devices included: how to clean gunshot residue off hands, how long does gunpowder residue stay on skin, what removes gunshot residue, Quincy police response time, can police track firearms serial numbers. These searches were made days and hours before Becky was killed. To investigators, this was no longer just suspicion. This was planning. Next came the video evidence. A nearby security camera picked up something unusual on the night of the murder: a lone figure riding a bicycle near Becky's home shortly before the shooting. The rider appeared to approach the area, then disappear minutes later, shortly after gunfire was reported. Detectives began canvassing the neighborhood and surrounding areas. Days later, they discovered an abandoned bicycle hidden in a location Tim had access to. The bicycle matched the one seen on the surveillance footage. It was no longer coincidence. It was a trail. Investigators then turned their attention to Tim's registered firearms. One weapon in particular became critical. Ballistics experts compared shell casings from the crime scene with test casings fired from Tim's firearm. The match was exact. The same gun that fired the bullets that killed Becky belonged to Tim Bliefnick. There was no longer any doubt. The digital searches showed intent. The bicycle showed movement. The ballistics showed the weapon. It was a perfect forensic chain. On March 13, 2023, less than 3 weeks after the murder, police moved in. Tim Bliefnick was arrested. He was charged with first-degree murder. As he was taken into custody, he showed little emotion. Behind him, the digital evidence, surveillance footage, ballistic matches, and Becky's own warnings all stood in silent agreement. The hunter had been identified. But the real battle was only beginning, because now the case would move into a courtroom, where every secret, every lie, and every click of a keyboard would be exposed to the world. The courtroom in Adams County, Illinois was filled to capacity on the first day of trial. On one side sat prosecutors, armed with digital data, forensic science, and weeks of testimony. On the other sat the man accused of murder, Tim Bliefnick, expressionless, silent, watching as the case against him unfolded. At the center of everything was the woman he once promised to love, Becky Bliefnick. From the very start, prosecutors made their position clear. This was not a crime of passion. This was a premeditated execution. They walked the jury through a timeline of digital activity recovered from Tim's devices. Search after search, question after question, all pointing toward one conclusion: planning. Jurors were shown screen captures of searches about removing gunshot residue, police response time, firearm traceability. The prosecution emphasized these were not curiosity searches. They were survival searches made by someone preparing to commit a violent crime. Then came the surveillance footage. Jurors watched grainy video of a lone cyclist moving through the neighborhood on the night of the murder, approaching Becky's home and leaving minutes later. Next, police testified about the abandoned bicycle that was later found. It matched the exact model and appearance seen in the video. It was located in an area Tim had access to, and it directly connected him to the scene. But the moment that changed everything was the ballistics testimony. Experts explained how shell casings from the crime scene were test-fired and compared to bullets from Tim's personal firearm. The match was exact. Same weapon, same markings, same fatal rounds. There was no alternative explanation. Then came one of the most emotional moments of the trial. Prosecutors introduced messages Becky sent to friends and family before her death. Text messages, voice notes, written warnings. One message silenced the room. "If something happens to me, he did it." Jurors stared at the screen as those words appeared in black and white. A prediction, a plea, a warning from beyond the grave. The courtroom was silent. The defense argued that the case was circumstantial. They claimed someone else could have used the firearm. The bicycle could have belonged to someone else. The digital searches were coincidence. But each claim collapsed under cross-examination. The firearm was secured under Tim's control. The GPS data placed him near the scene. The timing of the searches aligned directly with the murder, and no evidence suggested anyone else had motive. As witnesses came and went, one truth became inescapable. Every road led back to the same man. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated. The wait stretched for hours. Families sat in silence. Becky's parents held hands. Her children were shielded from the cameras. Then the jury returned. The foreperson stood, and with a trembling voice, delivered the verdict. Guilty. On all counts. Tim Bliefnick was immediately taken into custody. Weeks later, during sentencing, the judge spoke directly to him and imposed the maximum penalty under Illinois law: 3 consecutive life sentences, without the possibility of parole. Tim Bliefnick will never walk free again.
Thanks for watching. For more interesting videos, please subscribe.